I wonder about like grieving as well. Like I guess what we should do after death or, after someone who's died, right? So to use my grandpa as an example again. So he died in December, and then it wasn't really his funeral because he donated his body to science. So I never saw his body. Like the last time I saw him was like almost 2 years before he died. So, and when I went to his memorial service, it was in like a hotel ballroom kind of setting, right? So, and then, there was music and people sharing stories about him. And so there was meaningful in that way. But I think there's a way in which I wasn't able to grieve for him because his body was never present. It felt like this abstract thing, it took longer for me to even accept the reality of his death. And then I would contrast that with my friend, you know Javier as well, like who died this summer. And we were able to have like the full meal deal with his, which is amazing that there's so many ways you can see God working, in retrospect. Like, so he died in June, and it was this moment of like the COVID thing had kind of quieted down enough for us to even be able to have a large gathering. Like it was just this kind of eye of the storm in a way. But there was a vigil, there was a funeral with the body present, and there was a burial. And I had never experienced that kind of, I don't know. I remember the priest talked about it as almost like, there's this work that we have to do now, this liturgy, right? Like we actually have to do this work of grieving and honoring Javier, and being able to do that work and being able to like see his body. And it was such a different experience of grieving someone who had died. There was so much more cathartic and concrete and beautiful. I don't know. It's so hard to explain, but it's really changed the way that I think about, like now I think about things like that. I think about like, what do I want to happen after I die? I'm like, I want a vigil, I want people, if it's possible, to be able to sit with my body for as long as they need to, like, cause that was something that was really meaningful for me. But I don't know. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I love that you bring this up. I would teach a class in the religious studies department on religious ethics, on death and dying in my previous spot. And one of the things I had students do was to write their own funeral service, to get them thinking about like what happens communally when we die. And in a sense, who is the funeral for? Is it for the person who's died, or is it for the people who remain? And it's a big, question for me, thinking about what is the work to be done and how do our community or lack of communal responses inhibit the work that is to be done. So it's in the literature on death and dying, often people will talk about the way dying changed with the advent of modernity and modern medicine. And one of the big things is it moved into the hospital and it moved out of the home. And it became something that was sort of divorced from the rest of people's relationships. And in particular, children would not be present when somebody died or to see their body. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And so that's one thing that I think most of us have experienced. I've never really seen somebody at their deathbed or anything like that. In the Middle Ages, there's a historian named Philippe Ari who writes about what he called tamed dying or tamed death. And tamed death for him was death that was met within a context of choreographed and well-known liturgical responses within a community. And what made death tamed in that sense is that when it came, it was familiar, and people I mean, people knew what to do, right? They knew what to do when death was coming, when it was drawing near. There were handbooks that you could read, these sort of Ars Moriendi, the Art of Dying handbooks that were wildly popular in the Middle Ages, and sort of outlined a communal, choreographed kind of back and forth. There was a role for the person who was dying, who would, call people in and make amends, and then there would be liturgies to be said, and the priest would have a role, and other people would have a role, and then when somebody had died, people knew how to respond, and really we have nothing like that today, and there's all sorts of reasons why, having to do with sort of illness trajectories and how people die, what people die of, and how sort of our technologies play a role in that, and then the sort of pluralism of our life, where we don't have these sort of, we don't have scripts anymore to know what to do. And so what you're describing, that Javier's, funeral and memorial and burial, was a preservation of a sort of script that has been brought through and has continued to be observed, that allows people to have sort of a role and to do something together.